So I'm making fasoolia, which is the beef and green bean stew that I grew up eating. Now you can buy stew meat at the store that's already been cut down and just pull it out of the package. I prefer to break it down myself. So I usually go to the store and I get a big like 4-pound chuck roast, and then I trim off the fat. You see the little pile of fat over there, and then I cut it into like 1 to 2 inch chunks like this. A little bit of fat isn't bad because that's what is going to make the meat moist and tender. Once we've cut up all the meat, we're going to have to season it. So, and while I'm seasoning it, I'm going to go ahead and get my pot going nice and hot. Now, again, this is my mother's recipe, and she said make sure you season the meat well because that's what's going to flavor the sauce when it all cooks together. So don't stint on the seasonings. So a good bit of kosher salt. Remember, this is a ginormous chuck roast. So I got a good bit of salt, black pepper that I just ground, so it's nice and fresh. Garlic powder. I have only granulated garlic. Not really sure what the difference is, but I'm going to use it. Nice and garlicky. Don't worry, we're going to add fresh garlic at the end, which is going to be delicious. And then the last and most important traditional flavor is allspice. So I'm going to get a good handful of allspice. And now I'm just going to mix all together. And basically, we're going to use the traditional technique of first searing our meat before we stew it. So now that it's all seasoned, I'm going to go wash my hands and I'm going to start it in the pot. Now we're going to sear the beef in the pot. And I have a small pot. There's no way I'm fitting all that meat in one batch. And if you put too much in there anyway, it gets all steamy and soggy and like gray. And we want nice dark browning. So I'm just going to do this batch by batch. That little sizzle sound is good. Probably going to be here all day since my chuck roast was so big. But as we are in quarantine for the coronavirus, I figure we'll just eat this for 3 or 4 days. My pot is sizzling and we can see this is kind of the darkness we want on the meat. Shouldn't take too long, a couple minutes aside. And then I'm going to stick that into that bowl and do my next batch. And then we're going to let it braise for about an hour. Finally done browning all the meat. So I'm going to add all of it back to the pot. And just, you can cook in whatever oil doesn't brown too much. I use olive oil. And this is a lot of meat. I normally don't make this much meat. But, again, desperate times. So then I'm going to cover it with water. And this water was just previously boiling. Again, another tip from my mom is that you cover it with hot water. So there we go. We're just going to cover it, still boiling. Going to give it just a little adjustment. Kind of scrape up some of the goodies on the bottom. And then I cover it and I put it on medium. And we're going to let it go for an hour. I'm going to check it in a few minutes. If it's boiling too hard, I'll turn it down a little bit more. But again, my mother, the master, says you want it like at a hard kind of simmer. While the meat's cooking, you have to then prepare the beans. You don't just put the green bean whole into the stew. There's a special way that you trim it. Normally, I try and get fresh green beans from like the farmer's market, but again, I'm just using these 2 bags of trimmed beans. If I don't like the ends, I'll just trim those off, check for strings, no strings. But the art to fasoolia is how you trim the beans. So here's the vertical line that goes down the bean. You cut kind of underneath it along the whole bean to get 2 halves. And then you cut that in half so you have these like 4 out of the beans. I asked my mom one time, why do you do it like this? And she said, because then the sauce gets into the bean like little pasta and it holds the sauce better. So that's why we do it this way. So I'm going to work through these 2 bags while my meat cooks. and that's that. So I'm on my second bag of beans now. This is definitely the most tedious part of making fasoolia. But I remember growing up, it seemed like my mom could do 4 things at once. She'd be slicing beans, watching the pot, yelling at us kids. She was the master for sure. I, however, take quite a long time to work my way through the beans. I checked on the meat. I turned it down because it was bubbling too hard. Erin, how does it smell in here?
Really good.
It's starting to smell like my childhood. So Erin is upstairs learning some math during her homeschool. Rocket is staring at me because he wants to go out, but I gotta get the rest of this fasoolia going. So, meat's looking good, bubbling away. I took my finished green beans and sauteed them just a little bit to take away the hard edge. Usually I would use an onion, just dice up an onion, but I'm out, so I use shallot, because that's all I had. And then I'm going to puree in my blender a can of tomatoes. I'm supposed to use whole tomatoes, which I have, but I grabbed and opened a crushed tomato can, so we're just gonna go with it. And then you squeeze the juice of 1 lemon in this, and then I'm gonna put everything together and let it cook. So I've added the pureed tomato, crushed tomato, added the beans, and stirring it all together. I'm gonna give it a taste here in a second. Probably need a bigger pot. And I would say my ratio of meat and sauce to beans is probably a little off, but again, desperate times, I just went with what I had. Normally I would have less sauce and more beans, so it's more stew-like. But I think the sauce will cook down a little bit. I'm gonna turn this back up to bring it to a simmer, and this will probably go another 30-45 minutes until the beans are tender and the meat is all but falling apart. It's been a long day. Apologize for the look here, but I'm gonna go in and taste it, see how we're doing. That tastes pretty darn close to the original. I'm gonna let that cook now. All right, it's all coming together. So this has been cooking for a while. I think the beans are done, but the way to tell if your meat is done is if you can cut it with a spoon. It should just fall apart. So I just took this one out and it looks pretty tender. I'm gonna taste it. Delicious. I don't actually need any more salt in there, but the last step in finishing your fasoolia is to crush some garlic and butter, and you add that at the very end to flavor the sauce. So I'm just using the same pan that I used when I sauteed the green beans, because Scott gets mad when he has to clean too many pans. So I'm just gonna crush all the garlic. I have 4 big cloves here, which normally I would use 2 or 3 normal size ones, but that's a big pot of fasoolia, so it's gonna need some garlic. The most important thing with the garlic is don't burn it, because then it turns rancid, and then you'll either have to start over, and if you made the mistake of sticking it in your fasoolia after you burned it, it's not good. So I'm just gonna let this brown a little bit. I'm gonna crush this one more time like that, and we're gonna give it a little move around in our butter. I'm gonna bring all this other good stuff in there too. Why not? Why not? Turn that down. You just want to take off the raw flavor, but you don't want to burn it. You don't even want it to turn brown. You want the butter to get all garlicky. I'm gonna turn this guy on. We're just gonna cook that, and then we'll dump it in there.